In the dynamic world of private LTE networks for utilities, it's all about a collective approach toward grid modernization solutions. Join us alongside leading utilities including Ameren, Evergy, Lower Colorado River Authority, San Diego Gas Electric, and Xcel Energy, who are driving the evolution of utility private wireless networks with Anterix. Together with our 100+ member ecosystem and the Utility Strategic Advisory Board, we're de-risking private LTE investments. We're not just providing solutions, we're pioneering a cleaner, safer, more affordable, and secure energy future through 900 megahertz powered private LTE networks. By joining us, you're part of a force driving innovation, accelerating returns, and future-proofing the entire ecosystem. It's more than spectrum. It's about evolving together. Don't miss out. Embrace the power of collective action, ensuring a sustainable utility private LTE evolution.
To learn more, visit Anterix.com.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome. I am UTC President and CEO Rusty Williams, and thank you for meeting me at The Intersection, sponsored by Anterix. For those of you listening for the first time, welcome to The Intersection. And for those that have been through this intersection before, well, welcome back. This month's episode of The Intersection focuses on the trade associations and their role in the critical infrastructure and technology industry. Today, I'm honored to have with me Dawna Qualls. Dawna is currently serving as the Executive Director of the Fiber Internet Service Providers of America, or more commonly known as FISPA. Dawna's been around the telecom industry for over 20 years, and in fact, many of our UTC listeners may remember Dawna from her involvement with UTC in the past when she worked at TVA. At FISPA, Dawna is an advocate for broadband accessibility, particularly in underserved communities. Dawna, welcome to The Intersection. And if you will, just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself in case they don't know you.
Good, great. Thanks, Rusty. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm Dawna Qualls. I'm the Executive Director of FISPA. My journey in the telecom world began, as you mentioned, over 20 years ago. I started with the Tennessee Valley Authority back in the late 1990s. One of the first jobs I had at TVA was doing antenna colocation for our large wireless carriers, putting their antennas on our communication and transmission towers. So that was kind of my first introduction into the world, and that transitioned into working with our telecommunication engineering folks and deploying fiber across the valley for our own internal operations. And that really solidified my interest in broadband and servicing the communities. And not that TVA is in the broadband business, but they were a critical part of the infrastructure with that. So kind of what you had talked about, I really became hooked on telecom, working with wireless carriers, how utilities played in that space. And I'm real excited to take that background and transition it into the role as Executive Director with FISPA, working with small to large independent internet service providers across the US, providing that broadband internet service to those that are underserved across the country. So I'm really excited to kind of mesh all the history together and to see where it takes us.
Yeah, so for those that may not have heard of FISPA before, so it's basically made up of, the membership is made up of the companies you just described, right? It's the internet service provider type companies that are out doing what a lot of the electric utilities are doing and trying to kind of fill that digital divide, that gap out there. And so that's basically, at least that's my understanding in talking with you, that's kind of the goal of FISPA, isn't it? But did I miss something?
Yeah, no, FISPA actually has been around since the 1990s itself. And it was definitely started by those local independent service providers. The one thing I love about our ISPs is they are entrepreneurs. They are grassroots, which, kind of like a utility, and that mission to serve the community is exactly what they've done. They didn't have good internet service. They, got loans. They borrowed credit cards. They started their own business thinking, well, I'm just, kind of going to do it for this small bit. And it's turned into some pretty significant businesses across the US. So yeah, very similar to a utility mindset of we're going to provide service to the best quality, and we're grassroots, we're in the community with you, and we're doing it together.
Yeah, and you and I have similar backgrounds, and our paths, our career paths, have crossed from time to time over that 20-year period. And I've had the opportunity to work with you off and on in different stages and different opportunities. But one of the areas that you and I did work together and cross paths was at UTC. And when you were at TVA, you got involved at the UTC at both the regional level and at the national level. As we're thinking about the UTC organization in general, and we'll talk about FISPA a little bit more as we go on this morning, what drew you to UTC in the beginning? Why did you choose to get involved at UTC as opposed to just kind of hanging out and doing your thing every day?
Yeah, no, it was some of the telecom engineers that brought me to a UTC regional meeting. I'm a big learner. I'm a hands-on. I want to learn. I want to understand that although I'm not an engineer, I wasn't designing, deploying, operating the telecom system or telecom networks. I wanted to understand the context of how we used it, how we operate it, the challenges, so that when part of my role at TVA was to work with large carriers that needed infrastructure for dark fiber leasing and or fiber builds. So I really wanted to understand the full context of the system and everything that went with it. And one of our engineers had brought me to a UTC show. And, again, I felt like a fish out of water. I was the only one that was not an engineer and doing all this stuff. But I was so welcomed within that group and learned so much. It was just through attending shows and building those relationships that I was encouraged, to participate in the regional committees, being on the regional board, and then, as you had mentioned, eventually rolling up into more of the board of directors as a whole. So UTC has definitely been a part of my foundation and building my relationships across the U.S. with utilities and understanding context of how they do operations, but nonetheless of how we all, despite the demographic or geographic that we're serving or working within, we all had similar, barriers and issues to work through, and really just leverage that support for education and solutions. So that would be one of the biggest things that I found my relationship with UTC is learning, but also just building a network of resources.
Yeah, and from my perspective, in the early days, I had a supervisor at Southern. It's actually at Alabama Power that was involved at UTC and encouraged me to get involved. And then I saw the value. And it wasn't just a thing to do. It actually helped me with my job, and that's kind of what kept me there. But I think I like that you mentioned you kind of felt like a fish out of water. There are, it is, I'm an engineer by training. I jokingly refer to myself as a recovering engineer, but, there's a lot of technical parts to the organization, but there's also, continuing to build business aspects to this. And what about the being able to sell services or support other parts of the business? And it's not just the technical piece. And that's one of the goals I have for UTC going forward, is that we're able to expand that reach into existing memberships. And whether it's more enterprise IT type people or cybersecurity people, we kind of nip at that today. I want us to get more involved in those areas. So you see, the different aspects of the way you just described it and how it all plays together, and kind of see UTC as that collaboration platform, if you will, for all those organizations within the same company.
No, 100%. And I really appreciated back, earlier in the days, I keep saying earlier in the days, as we've just discussed, I left TVA a few years ago. One of my milestones was retire at 50 and do something different. And I was very fortunate to do that. But it was the diversity of thought, of being in a room with others, and the how-to, almost similar to FISPA. I feel like FISPA very much is the how-to association. If people want to learn something or how did you do this, it's where that's the foundation in service that we kind of support within our peers. And being that fish out of water, I had much different perspective. I had different questions. And while some may not have been relevant, it was such an interesting conversation to have of, well, we hadn't thought about that. Well, how did you do that? And so I was able to share with what TVA was doing at the time of, well, here's how we're working with other carriers. And in fact, I brought Zayo and some others to UTC conferences to have those conversations because they didn't fully understand working with utilities. So I was like, no, here's a bigger conversation we can have. And UTC was so supportive of that, and the utilities and the peers within that space were open to have those conversations that I think we learned so much from one another. Not always that we could do things together. I'm not trying to say it was a solution for all and it was just a big picture, but being able to bring diverse thoughts to the table to say, well, how could we do it? And, what does that look like was definitely a great source for me.
Yeah, and again, one of the aspects for UTC and some of the other organizations as well, but is what you just described. There are a lot of companies like Southern Company and TVA, the large companies, although Southern and TVA are different, right, just by virtue of their business model. But you also have the municipal utilities, and you have the rural co-op, utilities, and you do have some gas, and you do have some water, and you get that collection of people together. It really does provide a wider view of the business, I think, and helps us go, hey, you know what? I hadn't thought about that. I wonder if that would work for me because I'm bigger or smaller or rural or urban or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
All that stuff you and I have done, through our careers, and we've been fortunate. You and I both have been fortunate to have these experiences that we've had. You go through all that, you never know where life's going to take you, right? I mean, we prepare and we have plans, but you never know where you're going to end up. And here we are both now leading an industry trade association. So what got us here? Why that? Was it just dumb luck? Was it, careful planning? Was it divine intervention? Whatever you want to call, this. I'll tell you what, let me start on this one. I've been asking you a bunch of questions. So let me start. What got me here? All right. What kind of drew me here? And I've got a couple of areas that I think that really kind of endeared me to UTC. I've been involved for quite a while, as we mentioned earlier, but through that involvement, I saw the value that as I just mentioned, that it brings to members and to the industry as a whole. I mean, it's not just about the individual member. With the advocacy efforts and with some of the other things that go on, it really impacts the industry as a whole. And when you look at the training, like I said, the advocacy work, the networking, that goes on, and helping people find solutions to whatever their business problems are, is kind of what kind of brings me into that. And the second point, and I don't want this to sound too, fake or noble on my part. It's, in this point in my career, I really want to figure out a way to give back to the industry. I mean, the industry's been good to me personally and professionally. And this is an opportunity for me to kind of help set the stage from an industry-wide perspective and, be able to give back, before I do decide to quit and hang it up and go play golf every day. So that's kind of my thoughts. I mean, what do you think drew you to that kind of a role at FISPA?
Yeah, I definitely think it's the passion. I remember being asked one time, I was doing some executive coaching, is, are you following your passion or did your passion find you? And I think that's a complicated answer, but nonetheless, I think it was passion that brought me to this opportunity with FISPA. I was off doing, something different. I was doing executive coaching role and building some other businesses in that aspect. But when I got the phone call about this opportunity, it happened to be from one of the ISPs I'd done business with back in the years, just randomly had a phone call out of the blue, didn't even know the position was available. And he asked me if I would be interested. And the more I dug into what FISPA was and, the members of that company, it really brought back that mission very similar to TVA of serving the community. And that is exactly what these ISPs are doing, is they found a need, and they're solving it. And I feel like just by nature, I'm a problem solver. I like to find solutions. And being able to lead an organization that is driven with that mission and my ability to, seek solutions or ability for non-traditional relationships or building a network of resources for these ISPs to do what they need to do so they can grow and expand that outreach into their communities is really what drove me to this opportunity, and wanting to work with them to continue that mission and kind of narrow that gap that we have across the US and the broadband space.
Yeah, speaking of that, as we kind of focus in on the business of UTC and the business of FISPA, a big portion of what FISPA focuses on is this idea of rural broadband build outs, or broadband in general, but with a focus on the rural broadband build outs. And that's a big part of what UTC does as well. Mm-hmm. So when you look at it from the seat you're in today, how do you see that gap being bridged? In what kind of role do each parties, these ISPs as opposed to, not opposed to, but in addition to the utility companies, how do they all work together to be able to fill that void?
Yeah, I think again it goes back to is finding the right partners in the right situation. We're no longer, and I'm speaking generally, whether it be from a utility space, a utility is no longer just selling power. It's not singular focused. It's not just that silo of I'm only power focused. They are now a telecommunications company. They may not be selling broadband services or selling commercial services, but as we talked about, you're building your own internal telecom networks and your own ISP for all intents and purposes. Same thing with, an ISP, an internet service provider, in today's market is, oh, well, I'm just going to provide internet service. They're finding the challenges of just the internet alone isn't the only service they can provide. So while there are companies that very much have the resources, the funding to kind of be that monopoly, I can do it all and I don't need to partner with anyone. I think there is going to be a crossroad, and we're at it, I think, soon, sooner than we had anticipated, that there's going to have to be a crossover of some real strategic partnerships that make sense for each company to come together so that we can leverage additional funding. There's so much grant funding out there for utilities. There's funding out there for our ISPs and then fiber and wireless and all these things. I think there's going to have to be a hybrid solution to some context for some areas that we're going to have to come together and work together in some space together.
Yeah, when that idea of partnerships and working together, I like that. And as we were thinking through, topics to talk about today, one of the things that we kind of brought up in offline conversations were, what kind of misconceptions do the different companies involved in this space have with each other? I mean, you got ISPs and you've got utilities and you've got a bunch of others out there. You've got wireless ISPs, you've got the CLECs, you got all, ILECs, all these companies that are out there. I'm pulling old acronyms out of the back of my brain there that we don't use much anymore. But you know what I mean? We've got all these different companies. So, do you see it? Do you think our members, whether it's utilities, ISPs, or anybody else, see this as an either or, in a competitive kind of environment, or is it a both and where we're all part of the solution to solve the problem that the country's facing?
Yeah, again, I think that's the complex question and answer that we have at the space. I think it just depends. But at the end of the day, what I think is important is that we're coming together as two industries and sitting down together and saying, well, we think this. We've heard that you only do this, or you only want to do that. And stop looking at each other so much as a competitor. We're always going to have competition, whether it be a utility coming into the ISP space or another ISP coming into an already built, community. So competition is the one constant that we can always bank on, but it's how do we approach that competition and how do we navigate that competition that I think is kind of the conversation I would like for us to have, that maybe there's an opportunity together, but maybe there's not. And if not, thanks for the conversation and move forward. But I do think from both perspectives, from the commercial internet side as well as the utility space, I think it's time to come and sit down and stop saying, well, you just want to be my competitor, when in some situations we're being forced into this space. If we knew there was another solution, we probably wouldn't have done it, or we would have done it differently. That was one conversation we'd had with the utility, was if I had known, we would have done it differently and worked with you to help build out different areas. And so that, again, there's still a competition factor, but sometimes it's better to have your competitors closer than it is to keep them arm's length.
Yeah, I understand that. But yeah, if it was, if there was no need, I mean, all the problems would have been solved already.
Exactly.
Right? And so we do have this underserved, unserved gap across the country. So, and again, I don't want to sound too noble in my quest here, but all of our industries, how do we best solve that? And the federal government's throwing money on the table, and how can we best figure out a way to fit that, to fill that gap, and help the country as a whole, and at the same time helping our individual businesses as well.
Yeah.
So, as I think about the different avenues and different priorities for each of our members, and by the way, I appreciate your board and your members allowing you to come be a part of this today, and hopefully they can get something out of it as well. What's the one thing that your members, if they're listening to this, would expect you to bring up as part of this conversation that maybe we haven't already?
Oh my gosh, that is a great question, Rusty. I think that we all get so wrapped up in just operating our business sometimes that we've got to start thinking past just today's to-do list. So I think the expectation that I hope that I'm serving on their behalf, again, is just opening up a door for a conversation and saying that, again, may not work, but there's opportunities to leverage. Like I said, some of our ISPs have worked very closely with utilities and have had a great relationship sharing network, leasing network to one another is how do we, again, look at our communities. If we are truly community focused and wanting to bring that service to all in some context, is how do we approach the conversation without it seeming like a threat or, intimidation? Is really just, there are many opportunities. We want to open the door. And more importantly, we want to serve our community. So how do we do that more effectively together?
Right. Well, and I mean, that's the whole purpose in life for us these days, right? Is how can we get the people together, help find solutions? And it's, we're driven by our membership, which is what it's all about. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you got to look, I like kind of what you said. I'll say it a different way. You got to look up every now and then. We're busy every day doing the things we do. We're looking down, and we got to look up occasionally and see what's coming down the road. And what talked about our history together. How about you asking me a question? I'll let you turn the tables on me since I've been the one asking the questions so far. So based on our history and all that kind of stuff, what do you got for me? What do you think might be interesting for the people listening here to hear about?
Yeah, no, we've had some interesting history together, Esther. You consulted for me at TVA, and we've been in some different spaces. So yeah, it's been interesting. I love the fact I'm so grateful that you are at the leadership helm for the CEO for UTC. I think, again, your passion, your history is great for that. But tell me a little bit about something that weighs on my mind. We're both fairly fresh in our positions, but nonetheless, what is the legacy? What is it we're wanting to leave within this association that we've done to improve, remove barriers? What is something that you're focused on, or that you're hoping that when you leave, people look at you and say, oh, his tenure at UTC, he did these things for us?
Yeah, it's hard to get to that point. I guess when you're in the latter part of your career like I am, maybe it becomes a little bit more of a thing you think about. Because, when you're 25 and you're starting your career, you're not worried about your legacy at that point, right? But, I'm a planner person. I'm always, I don't like to do things off the cuff. That's just the nerd inside of me, I guess. But, I like to think about, what does it look like, not only today, but tomorrow, and then a year from now, and 10 years from now. When I think about that from a UTC perspective, regardless of however long I'm here, and again, who knows if that's 6 months or 6 years, it won't be 60 years, but it may be some period of time. I have been espousing the idea with the staff of the concept of the greater good. So I think from a societal perspective, and again, I don't want to get political or too social or anything else, but the environment we're in kind of makes us focus about ourselves, right? And the idea of community or greater good sometimes gets lost. Yeah. And again, I'm not talking about some kind of, hippie style love in kind of thing, or hand holding kumbaya singing kind of scenario here, but I'm talking about the industry.
Yeah.
Right? We've been in this industry for quite a while, and I'm talking about telecom and utility and how those marry together in what we do every day. What can we do? What can I do as an individual? What can my team do? What can my company do that improves the industry?
Exactly.
And when the industry is improved, then it reflects back and helps us as individuals or as work groups, and it just all kind of builds on itself. So if we can kind of look up and see the horizon, see how what we do impacts those around us, and try to do things that improve the situation, whatever that is, whether it's my work group or the industry as a whole, that's kind of what I want. I want the industry to be better because of these little things that we might have done, and I want UTC to be a part of that. And people look back and go, what UTC did, in the mid 2020s, that kind of set the stage for this or that. And I guess that's kind of the idea from a legacy perspective. So how about you? What do you think, or what do you want people to think about you, whenever you do hang them up?
Yeah, no, it's a difficult question. I also think I want to live the legacy while I'm building whatever the legacy is as it's defined for me. But for me, it's all about the impact. Is what is the impact that I can bring to this association? And I see that through, again, the conversations, the resources, the network, the diverse perspective of conversation of, have you considered this? Have we considered that? Of, well, who else should we bring to the table? So yeah, definitely I would prefer, that my chapter within FISBA to be that, she really brought a network together that we hadn't thought about. She brought resources when we said we needed help in these areas, that I went out and sought those opportunities to bring those resources to this team and members that, like you said, it's member driven. So while I have ideas, that I want my ideas to be driven and, concrete in the fact of that's what they wanted and that's what they needed. And I set them up for success for that next level. Like you said, when they finally look up, it's like, oh, I need this. Oh, well, I've got it over here. Or I can call so-and-so for that. That's really part of the chapter that I want to bring.
Yeah. And as we look at ourselves, this is a journey, right? We're at different points on the journey as individuals from a career perspective. But one of the things I tell people, and leadership development is kind of, an avocation of mine. I enjoy the reading and talk about it a good bit. I ask the question, or as I'm talking to people, do we ever stop and say, am I better today than I was yesterday?
Right.
Am I better today than I was a year ago? And then how does that impact those around me? My work group, my company, my industry. When we look globally now in our positions, are we better? Is the industry better because of what we did a year ago or 5 years ago or today? And I think that's important to me anyway, is, that we invest in ourselves, we continue to get better, and then we expect everybody around us to kind of have the same ideas. And again, collectively from that, greater good concept, we all, as the tide comes in, all boats rise.
Yeah.
To turn that phrase, right?
Yeah.
So, that's kind of where I am, and looking at this. But when you look at it near term, what do you see in the months that you've been there? What's the one thing that you think is the most rewarding, that you've seen so far, or maybe something unexpected in being in your role?
For me personally?
Yeah, for you personally.
Yeah. Honestly, I think it's just being back in the telecom sector. I didn't realize how much I had missed it. These members have been so embracing. Again, me asking what I felt were just silly questions of, hey, I'm just trying to learn. So I'm sorry if this is, kind of a really basic question, but they've taken me in, they've taught me. We had our annual conference earlier this year, which was one of my first real introductions to be able to meet the membership and hear their needs, that it's their story. I know we talk a lot about storytelling, but these members and what they're doing, how they started and where they're at today is so inspiring that for me, that's my motivation. I get up in the morning. I think that you had a podcast earlier about, what gets you up in the morning. It was Carnell Thomas had mentioned this, and it's when I wake up, it's how can I better serve my members? I very much aligned with Carnell on that. It's these people are doing great things. So how can I help them be better? And then I feel like the side effect of that is I get to be a part of that, and I get to be a better person with it while I live my passion of trying to really bridge that digital divide, if you will.
Yeah, and being able to empower those around us, whether it's staff people
Yeah.
or members or whomever, and just help them be successful.
Yeah.
And be able to step back and look and say, man, look what they were able to do,
Yeah.
and when given the right environment to do it. For me, you mentioned earlier the whole idea of networking and relationships, and we say networking, and all the engineers, that's involved. We're not talking about bits and bytes and feeds and speeds kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about the interpersonal, network that we develop over time. To me, that is just absolutely invaluable, from a business perspective as well as a personal perspective. I mean, there's people I met through the industry and UTC specifically 25 years ago that are still around. I still call, I consider them a friend, but I also consider them, an industry coworker, and can call and say, hey, man, I've got this issue. Have you ever had that happen before? Or, hey, I hear that you guys are working on this. Can you tell me about it a little bit? And so that to me is the most rewarding part of this business. And it's like any other that you're a part of, you've got this community of people that, care about each other, that, care about the industry and want to do a good job, and they want to help you or me to be successful as well. So, I love that part of it. And I think that from a UTC perspective, that has been undersold in the past. And that's part of, the message that I'm trying to get out now is, hey, don't undervalue that. Take advantage of that. Go talk to people, meet people, shake their hands, and don't be afraid to ask a question. And to your point earlier, I have no clue what you're talking about. Tell me what that is. And maybe that's something that I need to know, or that's something I can leverage, later down the road. But, just be able to have that confidence and comfortableness to be able to have those kind of conversations. So, and I know you're very good at that as well, of taking advantage of those networking type opportunities. So, you're my teacher from that perspective, from, building those professional networks.
I think we've learned together. But again, I think that going back to kind of the theme and discussion of what we're here today to talk about is that's the power of the associations. So it's, while we can provide all the resources and networking opportunities, available, it's important for our membership to be engaged and take advantage of those, that you get out of it what you put into it. But for the most part, I can't, express enough of how UTC, I think, has been a master at that. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you do to bring additional value to UTC in that context, while I try to build some additional context around FISPA. And, again, networking, not from the engineering perspective, from the people perspective, but it's the associations, industry associations I've been a part of through my career have been invaluable. And to be able to lead an organization in that context, I'm super appreciative and excited to be a part of, and just grateful to be able to have a relationship with UTC. Again, I think it's about the conversation. It may not be a solution, there may not be an answer, but being able to bring associations together because we collectively have common, missions, I think is what's important, and would love to hear more from your members about their thoughts in this space and how we could be more effective working together.
Yeah, that's our goal, is, again, trying to figure out a way to make everybody successful. Well, we could sit around and talk and commiserate for hours, but nobody really wants to listen to that, except maybe you and I. So we'll kind of wind it down here. But I want to thank you, Dawna, for being a part of this conversation today. It's been interesting for us to go through some of these issues, and maybe we can do it again in the not too distant future and see how it is for both of us, a few months, a year or two down the road. But it's been fun talking to a fellow trade association leader out of this industry, and trying to see what kind of impact we can have. Any final words from you before we go?
No, I think, like I said, I'm just super grateful to be here. I've been very appreciative of UTC through the years, and it's my honor to be here on this podcast with you. today, and thanks for having us. And, I can't wait to have you hopefully be a part of something that we're doing at VISPA again, so we can highlight you guys on our side of the house. But again, thank you so much for the time today. As always, enjoy talking with you, Rusty.
Absolutely. And same here. Well, thank you, Miss Dawna, for being here, and to everybody listening. I appreciate you tuning in to this month's edition of The Intersection. You know what? We'll do it again next month, and we'll be previewing our annual conference. That'll be in Mobile, Alabama on May the 20th through the 24th. So be looking for that as well. But thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again as we travel through the intersection next time.
Thank you for meeting us at the intersection. For more information about the Utilities Technology Council, visit utc.org.